Problem you don't see very often during the winter is pestering Gillett Elementary School right now. Officials dealing with a cockroach infestation this week. In this First Alert update, Emily Riley spoke with the principal and parents about how the school is tackling this unexpected pest problem.
I've been in that school building for 34 years. So it's never come up before.
Gillett Elementary Principal Kurt Angeli contacted Oconto County Health and Human Services as well as a pest control service after he was alerted to the cockroach infestation on Tuesday. He says a custodian was able to spot the insects early on before the infestation could become severe. Angeli sent out a letter to parents informing them they would need to clear the school for the rest of the week so it could be treated.
There really was one choice, and that is we deal with it immediately. We deal with it swiftly because there's nothing more important to me than the health and safety of my kids, my staff, and my families.
The Environmental Protection Agency reports cockroaches are most active in the spring and summer months, but can migrate into homes during the winter.
We found that it's being basically transported into the building from human beings who come into the building.
While some parents are vocal about their support of the school's transparency on the issue, saying it's been handled as efficiently as possible, there are others hoping for more action.
Nothing was said about the high school. And that's when kind of the questions came, because there's a lot of teachers that go between the two buildings, and there are students that go between the two buildings. So the question was, you're going to shut down the elementary school, but you're not going to do anything with the high school. What if they're being transferred?
Most parents in full agreement. The issue is unexpected.
You hear about like Milwaukee and like bigger metro areas having, they have like roach problems, like, oh God, all these parents. You don't hear about it in Gillett.
The principal says they've scheduled 2 more sessions with pest control over the next few weeks and will continue to update parents. Reporting in Gillett, Emily Riley, Action 2 News.